So we are at time. So without further ado, I am so excited to be here on day two again with Dr. Culver. And if you were able to attend his session yesterday, wow, just blew us away and helps. I know we've talked in the organization even about how his perspectives are something for us to add to our development bucket of how about how to be better and how to have more care. And I know we truly appreciate it. It's just such a privilege to welcome you back, Dr. Culver. If you did miss yesterday's, I want to note that he is also known as Dr. Kindness, and he studies the science of kindness. I just love that, Chris. And he actually challenged us to see that kindness is not a passive idea, but as a daily leadership practice. And again, if you weren't here yesterday, I want to say that he is from Oklahoma City. He's dedicated his career to helping individuals and organizations build environments grounded in empathy, respect, and human connection. He's practical and powerful, and he's worked in education. He works with organizations. His message, he'll tell you probably again, he wants kindness to go viral. And I can't imagine, we want care to go viral. And I think that's synonymous. And so, without any further ado, I am so happy to introduce Dr. Culver again, and I give it over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be back. And yes, I'm on a mission to make kindness go viral. So excited to dive in today with a little bit different concept, but the 5+1 framework. And this stemmed from my own dissertation research. And so we're going to talk about how we even got to this space of exploring this framework and how it came about to for creation and what it is. And so before we dive into what that this culture isn't vibes, or it's not words on the wall. I appreciate all the compliments on the jacket. I do want to ask you to define the word culture in 5 words or less, right? Take a second and just set with that. How would you define culture in 5 words or less? Now that you have your definition or you're working on a definition, you're getting closer to a definition, I want to be clear that I was unclear in defining culture. So, first and foremost, if you define culture of people, that's totally fine. You might be exploring like community with shared identity, or these folks are similar in this aspect, right? That's similar to a lot of us who navigate communities in which we probably have similarity of culture to people, or we find ourselves finding individuals in which we are similar. Or you might have defined it as a culture of space. And for me, my 5 words were supportive and celebratory environment. Well, that's four. I forgot a word. But you see the essence. I used or less, right? But it was that supportive and celebratory environment. And that's so important because when we think about culture, sometimes we get confused, right? Culture does not happen by accident. I think some folks think that we can print off some posters and print out some cards and do these things, and this is going to be culture. But really, culture is by design and it's by default. You can feel culture, and we're going to talk about and immerse ourselves in experiences, just like we did yesterday with kindness, as to how we feel around culture. I want you to pause here for a moment. I recognize that we just defined what culture was in 5 words or less, but I want you to think about the culture that you're navigating in your own life, right? Your own work environment, your own school environment, your own classroom, your family dynamics, whatever it may be that you're assessing. But I want you to describe your current culture in 1 word. You get 1 word. And the word that came to mind first is the word that you need to go with. You might be trying to push it aside, but go with it. And it can be positive, right? It doesn't have to be a negative culture if that's not what it is. So sit with that for a second. What is that 1 word that you would use to describe the culture you're currently living in? For me, in 2019, as I talked about yesterday, the word was toxic. If you weren't with us, it was the lowest point of my career. I had to call the employee assistance helpline. I had to seek out the free therapy sessions. And for so long, I was embarrassed. I was ashamed that I had reached that point in my life. But at the same time, as I shared yesterday, I'm so grateful. I found the science of kindness, and it led to me leading into this work. I was raising the white flags. I was calling central office. It was incredibly toxic. And I'm going to share some stories and experiences along the way that help you understand what I'm talking about. But I apologize up front for my language. But I want you to know the individual with whom I was working and I was following in this environment was a mix of Satan and Hitler. And yes, we called her Shitler. And you can laugh, and I hope you are. But the reality is that was how toxic this space was. And we were trying to educate students. It was 1,000 students, fifth through eighth grade, on the south side of Oklahoma City. And I share this vulnerability with you because this toxic experience, this culture that was created, didn't come from a mission statement. We didn't have on the walls, let's be toxic, right? Or toxic positivity. No, like we had walls of belonging and we had posters that says we all are kind, right? We had the things that were supposed to be there. But the reality is our lived experiences, the actions that people were taking were not aligned to those exact words or those posters on the wall. I want to take you to a day on the scene at this school. So it was one of my first days as an assistant principal on campus, and we were a five administrative team, and we wore headsets like you can see here on the left side of the screen that were like the FBI. We had them in our ears, and we that's how we communicated, and I thought it was really cool. And so on one of the first days of school, I remember the principal coming over the headset and she said, we're going to have an administrators meeting in my office. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, this is my first administrators meeting. This is going to be so awesome. What are we going to talk about? And so we go into the office, and it was in the first couple days of school, and she decides to tell us in this moment that we need to have a tornado drill. In Oklahoma, just for context, you have to have a tornado drill within so many days of the first days of schools to be compliant with law. And so she said today was the day in which we are going to do tornado drill. And so she's going through the procedures and she's asking who has the checklist and who's going to do this. And after she finished this long-winded explanation, I was really scared to say anything, but I asked vulnerably, has anyone told the teachers? Has anyone prepared procedures and expectations for the teachers? And friends, be prepared. The response is shocking. She looked at me and she said, the students went here last year. And I thought, wow, we're making decisions based on individuals who went a year ago. That's cool. All right. So I'm again new, so I'm leaning into this idea, right? So she then further says that if the students are loud or out of control, we'll just blow our whistles. So I'm thinking, all right, we're gonna go. So no matter of moments, she pulls the trigger for the tornado drill, and students begin to fill in the hallways. Friends, it was like herding wet cats. As I shared, there were five administrators, so you would think we had five whistles, but it sounded like a million whistles were being blown. And when I turned around, teachers were in distress. People looked like they were terrified for their life. This tornado drill that was supposed to take less than 5 minutes ended up taking 10 minutes, 15 minutes. I don't remember the exact time, but I know that it felt like forever because we were in true fight or flight. And I share this story with you because as humans, we want to be seen, heard, valued, and respected. When we communicate clearly with our expectations or things that are going on with an organization, that's not being over the top. That is creating safety for humans to thrive, right? In that moment of the tornado drill, how do we communicate it to our teachers? This is what's coming. This is what's going to happen. This is what we're going to do. There had been less chaos, less whistles being blown, less wet cats, and there had been more order. But teachers also would have not looked like they were in total distress. They would have known that they were seen as professionals. They were valued as educators who could help us be collaborative in the process, and they were respected for the work that they do with our students. So I want you to imagine this for a moment. Let's imagine we're in this administrator's meeting. Let's imagine we're in your family meeting, your colleague meeting, whatever it may be in your respective space. And let's pretend there's no agenda. You walk into this meeting and you sit down and there's no agenda for the conversation, right? Or let's say you go into this meeting and there's unclear expectations, right? Some people are treated one way, some others for another way, or you might be walking on eggshells, right? That's going to change how you show up as well. Let's say there's no feedback, that you give an idea or you propose something and no one says anything, right? We talked about this yesterday. You fill in the white noise. Let's say there's no recognition for a job well done or there was improvements, right? Maybe there's total silence. Each of these probably triggered something the way in which you feel. And I share this because I've lived these experiences. I walked into meetings where there's no agenda, right? I've walked into meetings where there's unclear expectations or there's favoritism on one side and not the other. And so you're trying to figure out where do I fit in? How do I balance this in eggshells, right? And again, these words on the wall are saying one thing, but their lived reality and lived experiences that we're talking about are something different. That matters because how we feel impacts how we show up. Most organizations, schools, businesses, leadership teams, we fix culture backwards. We try to focus on morale, right, rather than structure. And sometimes we focus on the pizza parties, right, or the gene passes, or bowling night out, or whatever it may be. And those are great. Those are intentional things that we do. But that can't be the only thing that we do, right? Because that is what we become back to that cringe kindness or that fake toxic positivity. So again, when we focus on structure, that's where we really begin to turn the conversation around for morale and for culture. And let me be clear, motivation is not the issue. So often we think that if we do these things, we're going to increase motivation. So for example, if we get to wear jeans on Friday, right, then we're going to be motivated to do our work Monday through Thursday. That's the idea. Well, the reality is that's not true. Motivation comes after we experience something that motivates us. And I'm going to give you an example. My friend Dr. Frederick Buskey out of North Carolina shared that motivation is value divided by effort. Right? So what value does this bring me is how much effort, right, I'm going to give, which is what's going to increase or decrease my motivation. So when we think about the tasks at hand or the pizza party, right, which is going to increase motivation? So I take you back to that middle school where I was serving with a chaotic tornado drill and the really toxic leader, and the word toxic continues to come to mind. In 2019, at the end of the school year, we lost 50 out of 80 teachers. And I remember sitting in her office as we were debriefing kind of what our plan is to restaff our school for the next year. And I was in a really reflective state to understand how did we get here, right? And so I brought up a question to say, wow, this is really alarming, right? This data point really stands out to me. And I remember her looking at me and she said, we don't have a problem. We have a teacher problem, right? These teachers couldn't hack it. And I'm thinking, whoa, we have a culture leadership problem. We don't have a teacher problem, right? We have a clear systems problem. And as I shared with you, those moments of therapy is where I found the science of kindness. But in this moment as well, it really encouraged me to think about what was next. And as I was sitting there, I thought, I have to research this. I have to figure out, am I totally crazy, right? Is this idea of culture, is this idea of kindness and belonging totally delusional and delulu? Or is there true research that says there's a foundation to understanding culture to do everything else? And so this literally led me to begin to unpack this and to explore this through the lens of my dissertation journey. And so what I found was what I call the 5+1 framework. It comes down to relationships deeply rooted in trust, where folks have empowerment, they have autonomy, they are recognized, and there's clear and transparent communication. So we're going to walk through each of these pillars with some activities and some ideas along the way. But this is what I found to be the core of not only motivation, but also retaining quality employees based on creating a culture for retention. The research study was rooted in Herzberg's two-factor theory. And so what I want to show is a direct correlation between Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We know that our most fundamental needs must be met in order for us to thrive, right? In order for us to have that self-actualization. So if you look on the right-hand side of the screen, it's unpacking Herzberg's two-factor theories. Herzberg's two factors and his theory in relationship to Maslow's as well. So it's showing at the foundation, these are the things that we are going to have. But what we need to have motivation is achievement, is recognition, the work itself, going back to that value divided by effort, the responsibility that we're given, that autonomy, and then an advancement, right? What opportunities are before us? So let's unpack each of these pillars together. But before we do that, I want us to give us a concept to ground ourselves in leadership, right? So I want you to think of the best leader that you have ever worked for. What is their name? I want you to capture their name somewhere, and then I want you to rate them on a scale of 1 to 10. I've given you a guide over here on the left-hand side of the screen showing 1 to 2 would be toxic or unsafe, all the way to a 10. I feel seen, valued, and supported, right? So take a second and capture the best leader. Now, I want you to think of the worst leader that you ever had, right? How would you rate them? Are they a 1, a 2, a 5, right? Where would they fall on the same scale of a leadership experience on the chart to the left-hand side? Now that you've identified the best leader and the worst leader, right? You remember why you loved that leader. You remember why you disliked that leader. For me, Josh was a great leader. I was working at a retail establishment during this time. It wasn't even in education. It was with executive leadership. And he was guiding me as a new manager, right? He was kind, he was caring, he was compassionate, he was visible, he was present. He would coach, and when there would be opportunities that I failed or I messed up, it wasn't used against me. It was used as a way in which I could grow, right? He led with rather than to or over, right? It was very much like developing skills. So I always ask, are you a Josh, right? Are you a 9? Are you a 10? Are you a Josh? Or are you Heather, who was the principal at the school where it was incredibly toxic, right? She was a 1 out of 10. She was incredibly rude. She was abrasive, lack of empathy, could explode in a moment, right? You felt like you were constantly walking on eggshells. She was very resistant to feedback and change, and everything was negative and a negative assumption about someone who was out to get this individual, or there was a ulterior motive, right? So are you a Josh? Are you a Heather? Where do those individuals fall? Because reality is one time, right, your best leader, they allowed you to thrive. You felt safe enough to take risks. But in other spaces, potentially your worst leader, maybe you were in that fight or flight mode, right? Maybe you're responding in the brain's threat system because you didn't feel safe. The reality is our leadership, and I don't believe you need a title to lead. I think when you choose kindness, the right people will follow. Our leadership impacts people because our behavior is a ripple effect, as we demonstrated yesterday. So let's dive into the pillars. The first one is relationships. People do not care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's a famous quote we've heard 110 times, and we know it to be true. And I want to pause here for a second because the people of today, right, our young people, our students, our colleagues, our families, our teams, whatever it may be in the context in which we're working, they're seeking mentors, right? People who genuinely care about them as an individual. And I want to say this in my whole heart. Respect today in 2026 is a two-way street. In order to give respect, we have to get respect. And I know that's a mindset shift for some individuals because before it depended on age and it depended on title and authority and all of these things. And I recognize that. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. Just with today's generation, respect is a two-way street. And when we think about identifying folks with respect so we can show that we care about them, I'm not talking about the good people, right? Just the good people, just the good employee, just the one who shows up on time or gives their 110%. I'm also talking about the least, the last, the lost, the left out, the left behind. Because every single person at the human level wants to know they are seen, heard, valued, and respected for who they are as they are every single day without fear of judgment and without fear of retaliation. So our people are seeking mentors and individuals who genuinely care about them. And building relationships can be incredibly vague, right? It leaves a lot to instinct. So here are some ways in which we can build relationships. Because remember, relationships are not compliance. You can greet individuals every single day by name, right? I worked in Thailand for a year, and there were times in which I struggled with using some of the tonal language, but I continued to try and continue to try. And I'll share with you that vulnerability really allowed me to connect with students and individuals at a deeper level. Ask questions about individuals' interests. I don't understand sports ball. I shared this with you yesterday, but it doesn't mean I won't ask about the match or the game or whatever it is. I'll try to engage in the best way I can. And sometimes I'll be vulnerable and say, I don't understand. Can you connect that for me? Or can you explain that to me? And again, that vulnerability allows openness and belonging and trust. Genuinely ask, how are you? Friends, our most sacred gift is our attention. When we have someone to come up to us or ask us a question, I encourage you, put your phone down, drop your computer, drop the documents, and actively engage in what it is they're wanting to tell us. And then let folks know that you're glad they're there today, right? Be visible, be present, be so grateful that they've come there today. And sometimes just saying, hey, I'm glad you're here today, again, signals cues of belonging that they know that they are seen, heard, valued, and respected. So I want you to think about when was someone who made you feel seen recently, right? What did they do? Think about that and capture it for a moment. For me personally, it's when a student recognized that I was making accommodations because sometimes life throws us lemons, right? And we have to make lemonade. We know that saying to be true. But some life had lifed for some students at the university. And so I was having to navigate some really hard decisions with them of how to modify. And the students said, I appreciate you having empathy. I appreciate you working with me, right? And to me, that made me feel seen because I was going above and beyond to meet them where they are. That's part of this work too. We have to meet people where they are. And as we talked about yesterday, each of us carries an invisible backpack. We don't always see everything that we're carrying, but when we work with empathy, we ask questions, we seek to understand, and we assume positive intent, right? It allows the opportunity to form stronger, deeper, connected relationships. Relationships are not compliance. At that middle school where I was working in 2019 that I keep referencing through this time together, I remember one morning when I was wanting to ask the principal a question, and she was sitting in the hall, and I went up to ask her a question, and she put her hand up in my face. So, friends, I had to check myself or I wrecked myself right there in the space. But she said, I can't talk to you right now. I'm building relationships. And she had a clipboard and she literally was checking check marks. And she had said a teacher's name she had just talked to, and she shared another teacher's name that she was headed to talk to. And I was like, no, you got it all wrong, right? Relationships are not compliance. And so I share this story with you that if you're going around and just saying, hey, 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 right? That's not intentional. That's compliance-based measures. But if you're connecting with people, hey, how are you? I'm grateful you're here today. And then listening, right? Those are intentional actions that you're taking because people can read between cringe, fakeness, or unkind, right? And true, genuine connection. The second pillar of all of this is trust. Trust is the most important ingredient in a relationship. Without trust, the relationship does not mean anything. Trust is a slow building process and it's a layered process that happens over time. Again, it's not a compliance based measure, it's intentional actions that you take. I want to take you back to my childhood. Yesterday, I shared that I grew up on a farm and I showed some pictures of picture proof evidence that I grew up on a farm. But I want to take you back to a summer in the hayfield. On the left hand side of the screen, you're going to see a 1-ton truck, and that was the hay truck that we used in the hayfield every single summer. On the right hand side was the very first truck that I had my parents purchase for me. And it's a standard. And I will share with you, I was a bitter party of one. I did not recognize why I needed to learn how to drive a stick shift when I was 16. But fast forward in my life, I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity to drive a standard. But I was too tall for the truck, so I usually drove like this. But I share that because one summer in the hayfield, my stepdad asked me to jump in that 1-ton and to move the hay bales and the hay trailer behind the well house. And I was really scared. I was like, no, I don't want to move the hay truck. No, thanks. And he said, you don't have a choice. These trucks are the exact same. Jump in that truck and move it. And friends, after it stalling 3 or 4 times, I finally got the truck up and going, and I'm cautious as I'm moving that truck, and I get it moved over behind the well house. And when I get out of the truck, as I've conquered the task, I'm like, woo, I have done the dang thing, right? Well, I get out, and my mom and my stepdad and my brother's face are horrified, and I have no idea why. And I turn around, and the white picket fence is taken down. I had blown the clutch of the transmission of the truck, and I had taken out the well house. And so I share this with you because sometimes we have to trust ourselves in order to trust other people. In that moment, I was trying to communicate, I do not trust myself to move this truck, right? But my stepdad had a different experience. So remember that all of our experiences aren't the same. So we have to operate with empathy and understanding so that we can connect with one another. So think of a time that you lost trust in a leader or in an organization. What caused it? Was it inconsistency? Was there silence, right? Were there broken promises? Were there more words than there were actions? Was there micromanagement? Was there a lack of clarity? Because all of these things matter when we're looking at trust in an organization long term. What you'll realize is that trust is rarely in the big moments, right? It's in those small moments, those small intentional moments that we're talking about that are so foundational. You can have all the words on the wall that says we trust one another, but if you don't have the moments in real time and the experiences that people get to experience, then there's not trust, right? So ask yourself now, do your people that you're leading with, that your colleagues or that you're leading teams of, no matter what your respective role may be, do your people know you? Think about the people that you lead or work with. Would they say that you're predictable, that you're consistent, right? Can they take a risk and know how you're going to respond? Are you clear, right? Or are you very ambiguous? Are they having to read between the lines and figure things out? Are you supportive? Or do they know that you don't have their back? Are you all of the above? Are you none of the above? Right? There's no right or wrong answer, but the reality is that how your people see you is how they're showing up, how they're taking risk, how they're engaging, how they're being innovative, and how they're trusting in their respective space. So it goes back to how it all starts with us and how we show up in respective spaces. Trust is created through paying attention, listening, and gestures of genuine care and connection, right? It's being genuine in our approach. People can discern between being disingenuous and being really genuine in our approach. And so it's actually recognizing things. If someone told you that they really like a soccer match and they knew the soccer match was on Tuesday, on Wednesday, follow up. Hey, how was that, right? That's a small, minute detail. But there's other things that present opportunities every single day in which we can remember things to reinforce or follow up on, to foster trust and to garner deeper relationships. The third pillar is empowerment. Empowerment is not giving orders. It's about allowing for ownership, right? So asking, what do you think? There's a lot of power in committees. There's a lot of power in team decisions. I remember someone recently who shared with me that they were navigating a decision and that they were waiting to make a decision once they talk to their team. And someone on the other side of this conversation shared, well, why would you talk to a team? You're the one in charge. And it's like, but I'm leading with a team. And it really took me back to think, wow, what a powerful moment not to use the power of position to make a decision, but to leverage an opportunity to connect with people, to build relationships, and to trust folks as well. When we ask the question, what do you think? It fires up dopamine and trust at the same time in our brain. So we are wired to receive connection and collaboration. The fourth pillar is autonomy. When we try to micromanage and we try to control people, we kill creativity. We kill innovation. We kill all the opportunity for real excellence to come about. But when we offer autonomy, it activates all of this creativity. When people feel trusted, the brain releases dopamine and ownership follows, right? So we don't need to micromanage things. I think we forget that we can set goals, we can set visions, we can identify what are barriers in the way and remove them, and then get out of the way so that people can do the work. The fear comes when they take a risk and they're not going to be rewarded, right? Or they're not going to be recognized that. Rather, they'll be scrutinized and it'll be used against them. That's where lack of innovation, that's where lack of trying new things comes, is because they're walking on eggshells. So yes, we can give them power, but if we use it against them, right, or we weaponize them with it later, that's not being inclusive of a culture that's going to sustain excellence and success. That's going back to fear. That's going back to being in flight or fight. That's going back to not allowing for a safe space. So it's trickling all the way back to not feeling like I belong, right? So it's really important that we understand that, again, empowerment, autonomy are not compliance, but they're intentional actions that we take. When we talk about empowerment, you can't ask people to care if they don't feel like they matter, right? So I want to pause for a moment. When did you last feel like you were valued? And what made that happen? Pause for a moment and process that. When did you last feel valued and what made that happen? For me, I think about the opportunities in which of sharing a message of kindness and hope and opportunity, because in a time in which so many people are stressed out and they're burned out, I remember someone sharing with me after a recent workshop about the impact that it had on them to have a brain reset, to take ownership of their own responsibility, to realize that life is happening for us and not to us. And so that allowed me to recognize that I was valued in the moment, right? I don't necessarily empower the individual with a skill or a resource, but I did give them the opportunity to change their thinking of their brain, empowering them to change the neural pathways in their brain, right? Every one of us has opportunities to empower different individuals, our children, our families, our colleagues, our faith-based organizations, our leadership teams. And again, I want to be really clear. A lot of us are leading in different ways. You don't need a title to lead, right? You don't need this certain title to be a leader. You can choose kindness. You can choose these intentional actions. And when you do that, that's when the right people are going to follow, and all of it's going to happen in the right alignment. I want to do a really quick check because a lot of us might feel valued in one way, but we think that everyone's going to feel valued in that way. But we know that each and every single one of us sees value in a different way. So let's do a quick check of what feels most meaningful to you. So we're going to read these 5 options, and I want you to pick one that feels like most you. Do you feel most seen when someone says something kind or encouraging to me? Do you feel most seen when someone spends quality time with you? Do you feel most seen when someone surprises you with a small gift or a thoughtful gesture? Do you feel most seen when someone helps you with something even without being asked? And do you feel most seen when someone offers physical comfort, like a hug, high five, or a pat on the back? Right? You clearly identified with maybe one or two, even three of those different ways in which you feel seen. But we have to be mindful because as we look at these, not every single one of us in this space chose the same thing. For me, I love words of affirmation and I love a small gift or a thoughtful gesture. I am not a physical comfort, love kind of person. So when I worked with colleagues who wanted to hug me, they had to warn me that they were coming in for a hug, right? Once I have a warning, I'm good with it. But if you come up and I'm caught offside, right? Remember, my response is kerosene and blow it down. So it throws me for a loop. But some of you sitting in this space, I share that because you may have picked physical comfort, a high five, a tap on the back, right? So our ways in which we are valued is different on the individual. So it's important that we ask people, how will it be? How can I show up for you and show value when you do something great or I want to appreciate you, right? That's not cheesy. That's not ridiculous. That's not delulu. That is rooting ourselves in vulnerability to connect with individuals so that we can show up for them to let them know that we see you, we respect you, we value you, and you belong here. And I want you that I trust you along the way, right? When we go to autonomy, as we talked about, control kills that creativity, but autonomy fuels it. So think about a type A leader. Let's go back to that worst boss that we've ever had, right? Were you micromanaged? Were they telling you what you should do along the way? Were they navigating those explicit every step along the way, right? I think there's a fine line between holding people accountable and having clear expectations with micromanaging and being in the weeds of every single aspect. Or did you have a leader, the best leader that we talked about, who trusted you, right? Who gave you the space that even if you failed or you messed up, that they weren't going to weaponize you and use it against you. They were using it as a learning opportunity. Because I really believe that sometimes our setbacks are lining us up for our greatest comebacks. And we need leaders and opportunities and spaces that allow us to navigate in such a mindset to thrive and be successful. But if you ask yourself, right, let's pause for a moment and ask ourselves, which leader do you thrive under most? A micromanaged, toxic, Satan Hitler mix leader, or a leader who's kind and caring and compassionate and empathetic as well? We as leaders and organizational spaces have to create choices, right? Choices allow us to create space in which people know they can thrive, that there's not a right or wrong answer, that we can be creative. And when we create choices, right, when we create this opportunity to be innovative, we do create some really dynamic things. I think about when a time in which, if you've ever read Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek, he talks about how the Post-it note was created, right? Someone had taken a sticky adhesive paper to a hymnal for church and it wasn't working. And so they went back to the 3M lab and they reassessed and that's what designed into the post-it note. But I think about, had there not been collaboration, had there not been connection, had there not been a choice in which you could explore something creative, right? Would that have ever been created for us to use? I'm sure over time, yes, we would have had it. But I think the connection between that story, the uniqueness of collaboration, the uniqueness of space to try something new and to be innovative without the fear of judgment or retaliation or fear, right, allowed for something really innovative and creative for us that benefits every single one of us. Now look at 3M. It's really expanded into a whole business out of a single idea that happened almost an accident, right? So I think about when we create choices for our students, for our children, for our colleagues, for our teams, for our respective spaces, what are we allowing to be created? What are we allowing that's going to come out of it that's innovative that we're not considering in the moment, right? We have the opportunity, no matter what seat we set in, to create choices for those around us and for ourselves. Because here's the deal. When these aspects are missing, people don't leave jobs, right? They disconnect first. And remember, burnout is not always about workload, it's about disconnection. And we talked about yesterday, 1 in 5 people say they are lonely, 1 in 10 kids say they don't have friends. 50% of adolescents say they are lonely, right? And I share these loneliness statistics as I did yesterday because it's equivalent to the same as smoking. Not that you're going to have the same lung implications, but it does have the same health implications. So when we start to see people backing off, when we start to see people disconnecting from their colleagues or from the work or from things that used to motivate them and excite them, that could be a form of burnout, right? And we have to assess what burnout looks like and how we respond to that. The fifth pillar of all of this is recognition. Recognition is a factor in increasing engagement, satisfaction, and ultimately culture. And I want to be clear with you. Recognition is the one thing that most people can see, right? It's the most visible thing that you can see. And we'll look at an example as we move forward. There are 3 easy ways to recognize individuals, right? You can give verbal recognition, like, hey, you did a great job. You can offer the awards and the certificates, right? You can give public recognition. Yesterday, I was sharing about the student Derek, who had more frequent flyer miles to my office as an administrator than any student in the school, probably, right? And I know that if we look for problems, we find problems. And so the teachers had identified him as the student of the week. And I did some assessing prior to announcing that he was the student of the week, because I wanted to ensure that if I did a public recognition with an award certificate in the middle of the gym for all of our students to see, that he wasn't going to be mortified, right? That idea of me just saying that out loud potentially made some of you just cringe at the idea of having to even get up in front of people, right? But that wasn't his case. So I was able to publicly recognize him and give him an award. So I share this because we need to ask people, how do you want to be recognized? Some people don't want any recognition outside of an email, a text message, or a little certificate in their mailbox. And that's totally okay. And some other people want the whole marching band to come through town and have the grand marshal of the parade to let them know they did a good job, right? That's equally okay. There's no right or wrong answer. But the reality is, as leaders or as respective individuals in spaces, we have to discern and identify, well, how do we recognize people to let them know that they're not embarrassed, right? That they're not in a fight or flight response because they're so stressed out. but we value you, right? You belong here, that we trust you. We're garnering a relationship. We don't want you to be disconnected from the work, right? So these are three easy ways in which you can recognize individuals, but we want to make it personable. We want to use their name and we want to be specific. We want to tell them exactly what they did and why we're recognizing them, right? I think about when we're recognizing students who say, "Oh, you did a good job." Good job for what, right? You did a great job on your internal benchmark by raising it by 10%, or great job. You only missed one day this week, right? Or how about when there was potential conflict before and now there's not? I really appreciate how you and you worked together to come to a common solution. Because here's the deal, in the times in which we're having to put ourselves out there and take risk, when we're recognized for it, it sends volumes of belonging and trust and openness to the respective individual who's receiving it. So there's not a weakness in recognizing people, it's an actual strength. So let's pause for a moment and ask yourself, when was the last time you were recognized at work? How did it happen? What did they do? For the context of today, I'm not going to share the most recent time in which I was recognized, but I will take you back to the time in which I was an administrator at that campus that we're talking as a through line of this conversation today. And the teachers, so at our campus, we had a teacher of the year, we had a support personnel of the year, counselor of the year, and administrator of the year. And the teachers that year elected me or voted me or however it happened as the administrator of the year. And friends, I was so grateful. I was really grateful. But at the same time, if I'm being totally honest with you, because it was a toxic space, I was ashamed, right? I was embarrassed. I was fearful what the retaliation was going to look like. And there are lots of things that came with that, right? And it's not important to unpack those details, but I share that with you because sometimes when we're recognizing individuals, we have to be mindful what the impacts are going to be for ourselves and for other people. And so I think we all want to be recognized, right? We all want that, but we want to make sure we're being genuine in our recognition as well. Our teachers were genuine, right? And a connection of the opportunity to be recognized was genuine as well. But when we offer alternative pathways or different language, right, that's where it gets distorted. And so when we think about recognition, we really want to be rooted in truth. We want to be rooted in that opportunity. So the last time you were recognized, I hope it was genuine. I hope it was honest. I hope you didn't feel like it was cringe or fake or any of those things, because then it just makes you dismiss the recognition, right? And I want you to hear me. You are a gift. You bring value to this work, to this world, and everything that you do. So thank you for sharing your gifts to the world in the respective spaces that you are. I genuinely appreciate you, and I'm grateful for that. The last pillar that I unpacked outside of those five was the plus one, right? Because Herzberg doesn't necessarily talk about communication and isolation, that aspect, this came as a through line when I was diving into the data. As we talked about yesterday, our brains are brilliant, but they are imperfect. We mishear things, we missee things, we misremember things. And we cling to that meaning no matter if it's true or not. So you may have seen this yesterday, but I want to show you again. What words do you think we are talking about here on this screen? Yeah. If you thought I was using profanity, friend, that's on you, right? We talked about that yesterday. But this is a literal metaphor for what happens in our mind every single day. When we don't have all the information, it's easy to fill in the gaps with negative responses. It's human nature, right? So there's not that you're right or wrong for doing it. We are all wired to do that in order to control ourselves so we don't go into fight or flight. And it happens every single day in our lives as a way for our brain to protect itself from those threats of the environment. Because remember, when we don't have clarity, our brain signals the same threat or fight or flight threat response in our brain. So when leaders don't communicate things, people assume, right? All kinds of things. There's two experiences that come to mind with this. One, working at the campus in which I was an administrator, we didn't have a weekly newsletter. We didn't even communicate we're having a tornado drill. We didn't communicate anything. It was always responsive, reactive, right? So people were making a lot of assumptions. People were doing their own things, whereas 19 different schools operating within one, right? My most recent position was serving at central office where I worked on a superintendent's cabinet. And we were coming into a district in which had been taken over by the state for the first time ever in the history of our state. And there really wasn't clear communication from central office. There wasn't clear communication to the community, to the schools, or anything. And so people had created their own narrative. There were Facebook groups created, there were Instagram pages created, there were all kinds of individuals from the community who were creating their own narrative of what was happening in the district. And so one of the most important pillars of our success as a district was we operated with communication. We over communicated, we over communicated, we over communicated. Because the reality is when we don't communicate, somebody else is out there telling your story. Somebody else there is talking about the things that are going on. And 99% of the time, they're from one-sided lens who don't see the whole perspective, who don't know all the moving pieces, right? And that's not right or wrong. But when we don't communicate, when we don't take the opportunity in our respective seats to communicate what's going on, then people assume all kinds of things, even if it's not true. I'll share with you when I was working in that same district as a central office administrator, I was over secondary schools. And so I had worked really hard to garner a relationship with this mom who was navigating some challenges with a student who was a part of our special services team. And I had just finished my doctorate. And so she had come into one of our meetings wearing an ankle monitor. And in that meeting, we had engaged in a conversation, and she asked me, she said, "Hey, Dr. Culver, now that you graduated, can you write me a prescription for something?" Right? And I laughed and I said, "That's not the kind of doctor I am." I said, "I'm a researcher." And so we had that conversation, what the difference was. Well, fast forward a couple months, her child had told us originally, she and her child had told us they were not going to walk for graduation. Well, on the day of graduation, we're sitting on the stage on the football field, and here come all the students, and here she comes with her child. Now, mind you, she still has the ankle monitor on. So as she's walking towards the front of the stage, our superintendent and our school board members are uneasy, right there. You can see it in their face, you can see it in their body. And I was trying to communicate to them that I had a relationship, I knew what was going on, but they were so dismissive, right? They were so dismissive of what was going on because fight or flight had taken over, fear had taken over, things had taken over. And so what had happened was they were communicating to me that they didn't trust me in the work that I was doing. They were communicating to me they didn't value the relationship that I had. They were communicating to me all of these other things that they didn't understand that I had worked intentionally and hard to garner that relationship with her. So this led to resentment, right? I had resentment of frustration from the superintendent to the school board to the individuals on all of these moving pieces, right? And I share this vulnerably with you because maybe you have an ankle monitor situation. Maybe you have a relationship situation. Maybe you have a time in which someone responded with fight or flight or threat rather than trust and value and belonging, right? But this happens regularly, and it wasn't intentional. Their bodies had taken over because they were nervous about what the reaction was going to be, not thinking about the relationship I had. I wasn't responding the same way because I was rooted in a relationship of understanding through empathy of how we gotten to this point. Again, not right or wrong, but it did send signals of belonging into our culture based on response. So think about those experiences as well. Our brains are prediction machines, right? We talked about this yesterday. It uses those prior experiences. It uses data points to prioritize safety over accuracy. As we were just talking about, some individuals on that stage were using their fear of experiences to show up in that moment, where I was using other experiences and data to show up in that moment. Again, not right or wrong, but when it's not clear, it sends a huge threat to our brains that we are operating in a fight or flight response. But when we are clear and we're operating in clarity and we all have a similar understanding, then we are kind. But as I mentioned yesterday, and I'll continue to say, when we are stressed, we automatically predict negativity. So we have to work on it through the muscle of our mind by choosing it every single day. 70% of Americans are living in a chronic state of stress. So when we choose kindness, when we choose to operate in clarity, when we choose these things, right, then we calm ourselves down and we get out of so much cortisol being pumped into our body. 7 is the magic number, friends. So many times people are like, well, I sent them an email, I sent them a text message, I called them, right? It takes 7 times of someone hearing something, seeing something, or understanding something for them to act. That's not right or wrong. That's not a generational difference. That is just what the research is suggesting. 7 times, right? They need to be told 7 times, 7 different ways, right? Maybe 2 emails, maybe 2 text messages, maybe a newsletter. I mean, there's all kinds of creative ways we can do it, but I share that with you because I was working with a teacher recently, and she was frustrated that these fourth grade students were not uploading information into Google Classroom. And so I was sharing with her some of the challenges that we're seeing at the university with graduate students, undergraduate students, just with the lack of time management or some of the skills with APA or MLA or writing style that they would have probably understood in high school or middle school. But I was sharing with them that the pandemic and some of the challenges we've faced since then have shifted some understanding. And I was sharing that with her vulnerably because we know that some of the skills that we taught before are being taught later and vice versa, right? And I was hoping to have an empathetic understanding. And she did understand. She definitely found that common ground of understanding. And so we were communicating here again around the number of 7. How do we communicate 7 times to our students they have to upload it to Google Classroom? How do we communicate 7 times to our team members this is what's going on, right? I think about when we were creating our agenda for leadership meetings. I would send out regularly, don't forget to update your items. And I'm sure to some people that's annoying or frustrating, right? But the reality is the research supports it. And what happens is it allows everyone to show up with clarity, confidence, and competence. And that's so important to belonging and to the ultimate culture of our school, or our spaces. We have to make spaces where people want to be, where they experience joy and their lives are enriched of it. The research is incredibly clear. We spend more time at work than we do with even our home and with our family sometimes, right? So when we're in that working environment, or we're in that environment that takes most of our time, we want it to be a space that brings us joy and excitement, and that our lives are enriched of it, and that we're not dreading it or living in a constant state of stress. So I want to pause for a moment. I've unpacked the 5+1 framework. We talked about relationships. We unpacked trust. We explored what empowerment looks like. And we looked at the dichotomy of autonomy. We unpacked surface level recognition and genuine deep recognition. And we talked about communication, because if we don't communicate, right, then people tell our story. So I want to pause for a moment. Which one is costing you the most right now? And spoiler alert, friend, you can use more than one, right? You can use more than one. Maybe it's two or three of them. I'm going to pause for just a moment. I hope you captured the idea that maybe you can focus on, or the ones that you can focus on, because at the end of the day, we're creating a community of belonging, a community of culture. We can have the best posters on the wall. We can have the best words of in our mission statement, in our vision statement, in our strategic plan, and all the data points. But the reality is, we have to create spaces where individuals can be their true selves with others, without fear of retaliation, without judgment. We have to create safe spaces that we can share our greatest accomplishments and our joys. We can recognize folks for their innovation and their strategic alignment, but we can also celebrate people who failed and took a risk, right? But we also have to have spaces that we can celebrate our darkest moments and our failures and some of the hardships that we navigate in life. It has to be where we can show up in each other's lives for the magnificent and for the mundane. It's knowing and being deeply known. It's fighting the good fight and helping those fight it as well around us, right? Because when we know that we're all in the same boat, rowing in the right direction, we want to work harder. But if the arrows are misaligned and we don't feel like a community, and we can say we're a family, but if we don't feel like we're a community, we don't feel like we all belong, we're all working the same direction, then the words on the wall, the posters, none of it matters, because this is the foundation, right? It's the 5+1 framework. It's the community that we're building. Your habits don't just influence what you do, they are an essence of who you become. We have to continue our practices every single day. I think Adam Grant alludes to the fact that you need 28 days in order to foster a habit, right? So again, these aren't compliance-based measures. These are not things you're going to do for 28 days and then they're going to be the culture. These are small intentional actions that you have to take every single day. They become an essence of who you are, that you embody these actions every single day. And I want to be clear, when we look at this aspect from the iceberg effect, it's easy to recognize communication. You're going to know if people are communicating or not. You're going to know if they're sending an email, a text message, or calling you. You're going to see that. You're going to feel that. You're also going to know if people are recognizing you, right? You're going to see the award. You're going to see the email. You're going to see those things. You're going to get the attaboy, the pat on the back, the high five, the marching band, if that's you, right? But the things that you're not going to necessarily see immediately are the relationships that are being formed, the trust that's being fostered through the relationships, right? The empowerment that's given to people and what the impacts are of that, the autonomy that folks are given and the impact of that. You're not always going to see those things. So it's easy to focus on these surface level things. It's easy to focus on the communication and recognition. But as you can see from this image and you can see from the framework, the foundation of the work happens below the surface. It's those relationships that are deeply rooted in trust, where folks are empowered to be successful and to be innovative, and they have autonomy for you to get out of their way so they can drive the bus forward and to be creative in the endeavors they're pursuing. So I want to pause here for a moment, because as we look about culture and we think about the vibes of our tribe, what is one action that you can commit to this week? And who is one person who will directly benefit from this aligned action? I'll say it again. What's one action that you can commit to this week? And who is one person who will directly benefit from this aligned action? For me, there's some students at the university that I don't have a deep enough relationship with, right? I feel like a surface level. And I think this came to to my mind through this conversation. So I'm grateful for the space to be vulnerable and reflective. And I think about the ways in which I'll intentionally connect with them, right? Asking questions, seeking to understand, engaging with interests of their life, asking how they genuinely are and hearing them. And I think when I do that, it'll be a direct benefit of those individuals, but also to me, because it allows me to begin to build bridges and foster that community where they know they can take continued risks and they can be their innovative selves without fear of retaliation and judgment. And I think so often we forget that culture does come down to positive relationships, deeply rooted in trust, as I just said, people that are empowered and have autonomy to do the things, and we recognize them for the value that we add. And I would add here that you clearly communicate consistently and ongoing basis, and that there's no confusion. A lot of times when we're looking at culture, we think that we're looking for a band-aid, a quick fix, right? This program, this canned system, these posters on the wall, this PD development, whatever it may be, right? The reality is, as we've explored through our time together today, it's not a band-aid fix. There's small intentional actions that we take every single day. If you're looking for free downloads of how you can foster your culture or create empathy or any of these things, I want to pause here and give you the opportunity to engage with these free downloads. There's lots and lots of resources on my website that you can grab that will help you create kindness or compassion or empathy and culture, so that you don't have to think about it. You can just download it and begin working the process. If you don't see something there that you're looking for, feel free to reach out. Happy to share anything that I have or create something for you so that you can be successful in your endeavors. And friends, as I always say, a lot of times we're out there looking for the light. So if you can't find the light, be the light. And the light you're looking for is sometimes one that you carry on the inside. I've had a blast over the last 2 days, and I'm grateful to share my research around the 5+1 framework. I thank you for this time. I thank you for the space to share, and I'm incredibly grateful for the work that you do around the world. Thank you so much.
What else is there to say, Dr. Culver? Wow, again, so many great comments happening in the chat. Thank you for sharing your resources, which are all fabulous. I know I'm hearing from people on the side too. We need to do a book study. We need to have him back. We need to do this. And, I love that. I love seeing your light because this is kind of our time of the year besides graduation, that we get to remind ourselves of what care means. And so I greatly appreciate that. I did want to I wrote down a few notes for you. And if anybody else has questions, please feel free to put them in Q&A and I'll ask Dr. Culver. We still have a few minutes left of time. But one thing I know that is at UAGC, at least in our college, we've studied trust through the Covey lens. And, great stuff. And it talks about, when you put some trust pieces in and then you do something wrong, it comes out and you have to replace those. And as I watched your slides, what dawned on me, or what I feel maybe a little personal about, is that, because I agree, we put all of these deposits in trust, but when we mess up, I don't think we take one out. I think we take a couple handfuls out.
I agree.
And that really hit home with your slides today, that we need to remember is that it's not as simple as putting it in and taking it out and you just replacing it. Sometimes too many handfuls come out and it gets really hard to put stuff back in. So
absolutely.
Thank you for that.
And thank you for that affirming thought. I agree with you. I think that when we mess up or there's a mistake, we take lots of handfuls of trust out, and really it should just be a learning opportunity, right? But we double down and go a different direction. I think that's really harmful just to ourselves and to the organizational culture. And so I appreciate you sharing that.
Oh, absolutely. And I thank you for the reminder, because I think something that I talked about yesterday in my presentation was, as leaders, especially those that may lead at a very high level, there's a tendency, the research says, to not really even be aware that that's what you're doing, is taking out those trust pieces, because you've got so many things going, and how important it is for all of us to go back and go, oh, wait, my intention was this, but how did it impact them? Because if it took away trust from them, it doesn't really matter what my intention was.
Yeah. I think that's a piece of reflection, right? Like, I love the way you said, going back, like, this was my intention, but what was the impact? I think that's so powerful when we step back and reflect, because oftentimes we're wired to be defensive, right? Well, this is what my intent was. And I think when we go back to the impact, it allows us to be more empathetic and human, which is so powerful when we're leading teams and organizations. I appreciate that. I had not thought about that thought, the way you framed it. So I really appreciate that push.
Well, So much of what you say, I think, resonates with so many of us. I'm sure the organizations that are attending today as well, and our attendees and visitors. But I know from UAGC's perspective, all of this hits really home for us. And so that's so appreciated. I did want to point out a couple others as we kind of wait and see if anybody else has questions. I have heard about herding cats, right? I have never heard of herding wet cats.
Oh,
And I am keeping that one close. So thank you for that one. I'm
you
going to
bet.
steal from you. Um, and then I also, one of the other points that I think, because I saw some things come through the chat, I remember being that teacher with terror in my eyes, in fear for my life with junior high,
Yeah.
when nobody knew what was going on, and a bomb threat or whatever it was at our school. And that's so true. And I still think it might look different in all of our scenarios of what that fear is. But when we don't know what's happening, you're exactly right. And I I do I have the poor comms team here at UAGC probably really hate me during this time because I'm like, no, you have to tell them more. You have to tell them more. We can't send any more comms out. That's not what we're supposed to do. And I'm like, oh no. But the teacher perspective in me says, you got to keep putting that out there or people are not going
Right.
to see it, remember it. And it's such an interesting perspective that educators have that differs sometimes than others. And then again, going back to that diverse experience. Well, we've learned it this way and then this way and learning how to play in that sandbox together. And
Mm.
I know a really neat thing that happened yesterday is I've worked with our marketing team now for 3 years on this. And I sent something over and I'm like, I know this is not what y'all are going to want to put out. I said, but we're having a request for our opening ceremony to be put out, a video that we've done of a lot of our faculty and staff. And they're like, oh, this is so long. And I said, I know. But I said, it's really important to people because they really want to see it. And they did, and they understood that this was more than about a rule or a data point for them in marketing. And so I think it's just having those conversations and really explaining the why behind it. And I love the why, and I'm going to keep maintaining that. Is that educator in me says you got to tell them more than once. You got to tell them every day before the summit comes that it's here, things like that. So let's see. The last one I had is when we are stressed, we predict negativity. And for me, I know most people know and kind of get made fun of because I try to be the most positive in the room, no matter what. And I get a little icky. I get it. But when you said 70% of the people could possibly be in that place where they can't not be negative, that broke my heart a little bit. And so I hope that we, at least at our institutions and even at other organizations, remember that sometimes our positivity is needed because the negativity is just going to bury us if we don't share that light, like you said, with others and hold them up. So
I
bring
saw a LinkedIn post this morning that resonated with me. It said, be the person that people want to work with, right? And I think about when you're positive, when you're happy, when you're solution oriented, doesn't mean that the challenges aren't going to be there, but people want to work together, want to work with you, right? When you become the people who are like dreading working with you, then that's where you need to be reflective too.
well, and it's scary. And I think that's why a lot of people don't jump into leadership because I'll be very vulnerable. When I started this, I was like, but what if I don't represent care? What if
Yeah.
I'm not doing the right thing? I'm in a really hard situation here where I don't want to mess up.
Yeah.
And I do mess up. Luckily, I have so many wonderful colleagues and we work so wonderful together. But some days I really question, should I be that chair? Should I be that? Should I be that dean? Should I be that president of the university? All these things I can't imagine go through our heads because of fear
Yeah.
of not being the light because we all mess up and being able to offer that grace to one another, I think is so helpful. And, anyone in this room, I apologize if I have ever done anything because it would break my heart, Chris. And I think you know that well enough to
Yeah.
know that and I've had teams and I love them so dearly. Um, and have just been so blessed, but I could have easily said no to this, which is something has been huge in my life for 3 years, just out of fear of
Yeah.
not being the person I needed to be for this position. And so I think that we need to look past that sometimes as leaders too and go, you know what? Sometimes we have to take the risk and then just try to be better, like you said, 1% every day.
Michelle, I don't think you know how much I appreciate your vulnerability in this moment because your message is so timely for me to hear. So I know you were sharing from a perspective of your lived experience, but I am so grateful that you shared in this space today because it resonates with me on a totally different level as I'm navigating some life. And so, wow, what a timely message. I'm incredibly grateful for you.
Well, I'm very, very grateful for you. And I know that this group is as well. I know we're all hoping we get to see you again. I
Yes.
know I'm going to make a point to see you again. Um, I don't see any questions. I just see lots and lots of wonderful words for you, Dr. Culver. And so thank you again for coming. Thank you, attendees, for coming.
Michelle,
Yes.
apologies. There is one question in the chat or in
Oh,
our
oh,
Q&A.
okay. I did not see. Thank you.
It
And
just came through.
I'm also going to post the links to get back to the other rooms because we do have a few other sessions to finish up the afternoon. It says, I love connection and true collaboration, but I also am very aware of my own social battery. And sometimes those things are at odds with each other. Any tips on how to use engagement opportunities to stay charged versus draining our batteries? Great, great question. Chris?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Two things come to mind. I would say do things that light you up and fill you up, and surround yourself with people who bring you energy. Get out away from the energy vampires. And I know there's times in which we have to be in spaces that maybe we're there folks that are not our most fond people, but think about things that you can control, right? Think about the three good things in that moment. I think in that opportunity, not saying yes to everything, not doing everything allows us the opportunity to really recharge our energy, but get away from the energy vampires, get away from the folks who drain you, the environments that drain you, just get away because that will not ever allow your battery to recharge.
I totally agree. And we're all writing this down, energy vampires.
I
I'm going to
see.
add one thing from a perspective. Most people do not believe me. I think you would, but I am extremely introverted. And so when I have to get into these situations and do these kind of things, I mean, now when I present, I can be on fire because I just have such a passion about what I talk about. But this drains me. And by tomorrow and today, my mouth will hurt because of smiling so much. And even at graduation, oh my gosh, there is so much energy there. And it's for me fabulous, but I'm exhausted. And so my advice, I know I have to try to do it, is take those couple days away and
Mm.
have your quiet again. Because it does fill my cup, but it is exhausting sometimes for me. But I've recognized that. And I know to take that time away from me to listen to my music, go do whatever I need to do after this gets done today. I'll take some time outside. And so if the question, there's so many things, but you're right, energy vampires. And it's all in how you adapt and can adapt to those. Because for some people, that kind of stuff just makes them rock and roll heavier and all that. Nope, I'm ready for nap.
Yeah,
So
I'm with you. I love it.
any others out there? Okay,
There
I
was a
have
question about my blazer. I'll take, I got it from Target. So if you're looking for the blazer, it's at Target.
nice. I love it. I love it. And y'all do check out his site. The one at Orange Sparrow is great. He's got his Dr. Chris Culver site. He's got some great stuff out there for us. And if you have any questions for him later and don't want to contact him, you can contact me and I'll get a hold of him. But I post if you're interested in either of his sessions to be nominated for a Clifford Blizzard Award, where we honor our past colleague who was helped us work on our first year summit. Please do use the forms. If you do it later, it's at the top of our main page that you can go into the award site. There's also a link to get back to the conference site so you can go see other sessions. Again, oh yeah, and Jen's saying anyone up for a book study? I think we might be, Chris. So we'll be in contact.
Okay.
And again, have a great day, everybody. And smile. Don't forget, he said smile, smile, smile until it hurts and then stop. Have a great day,
Thank you
everybody.
so much. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.